This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Lewitt, Spectra 1964, and OWC. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX 100D mic pre and C610 complementer mixed with Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
For commercials and stuff, it'd be like, make this sort of DJ track, make this sort of EDM song, make this. So I had to learn how to do all that stuff. To be honest, it's like kept me excited about doing stuff.
It seems like a lot of the heavier music is now integrating a lot of electronic music into it. Samples and like 808 kick drums, and hip hop and punk rock and heavy music always have been sort of parallel universes to each other.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Hey Rockstars, have you checked out Native Instruments recently? Look, no matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synths, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I personally love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then also adding awesome overdubs from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Go pick up Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guests today are Nick Townsend and Jay Clark, joining us from Infrasonic West in Los Angeles. Nick's musical prowess is rooted in the punk rock scene. He began drumming for rock bands at the age of 16, has been playing professionally ever since. His trained ears and his interest and passion for music production is owed to recording bands in his grandmother's garage. He attended audio engineering school at Citrus College in Glendora, California, and then landed his first audio job with Infrasonic Mastering in 2012, where he assisted Pete Lyman while simultaneously learning the craft of vinyl mastering and lacquer cutting. Soon thereafter, he started his own Townsend Mastering until 2021 when he rejoined Infrasonic Los Angeles. Nick has mastered records for The Egyptian Lover, Militarie Gun, No Pressure, Fleshwater, Spanish Love Songs, and many more, and specializes in vinyl mastering and lacquer cutting of over 2,000 vinyl records, including artists such as Cheap Trick, Paramore, Weezer, Iron Maiden, Bad Religion, and many others. His work can be identified by the hand-scribed NT found in the lock groove of each vinyl. Now, my other guest, Jay Clark, is an engineer, mixer, composer, and multi-instrumentalist based also in Los Angeles, California. In fact, they're both joining us from Infrasonic Studios in Parallel Studios today, so thanks for doing that, guys. Jay spent the majority of the late 90s and 2000s playing and touring in the bands Pretty Girls Make Graves, Kill Sadie, Jaguar Love, and Sharks Keep Moving. After moving to LA in 2010, he began composing music for ads and movies before expanding into post-production, re-recording, mixing, sound design, and dialogue editing for film and television. In late 2020, he began mixing and mastering music in Dolby Atmos and Sony 360RA. His spatial credits include artists such as Jennifer Lopez, MK, The Hold Steady, Nelly, Nicky Cam, Mark Anthony, and many others. Jay's studio was designed and built in collaboration with PMC Loudspeakers, Dolby Labs, and Sony Home Entertainment, and boasts an impressive 24 speakers. That's awesome. It's built to handle the present and future of multi-channel sound for music, picture, and gaming, offering an 11.1.6 Atmos and a 13.1 Sony 360 array for the most precise playback and detail of your immersive projects. That's super cool. I'm excited to find out more about that. Thank you so much to Raylan Janicki for setting the interview up. And Nick and Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Please welcome Nick Townsend and Jay Clark to Recording Studio Rockstars. Nick and Jay, are you ready to rock, my friends?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's
Thanks for having us.
Great. Great to have you guys here. And thanks for sitting tight through the super long intro there. But it's such a, well, it's, you know, having double guests and then having so many cool things to talk about. You got to get it out there.
Definitely.
So I don't really have an exact plan for how we go back and forth, but let's just start with you, Jay. Give us a brief introduction into, you know, who you are as far as your interest in music and getting to your studio. Maybe give us the quick version, and then we'll go over to Nick.
Oh, yeah. So I am I guess a musician first, and I, like most musicians, found my way into the studio after years of recording, and then, you know, bands slowly kind of falling apart, and wondering, well, what do I do now? And then, you know, kind of remembering the things that I liked about recording when I'm not making music. So I kind of, you know, wandered into the production side of things, and which is great. And so that's how I ended up doing that. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 2011. And at the time I was doing a project where it was kind of like a live video and audio recording for bands. We would do two songs and do like a live music video. And cool. Doing that, I ended up meeting a lot of directors and DPs and other people. And that's how I kind of wandered into the post-production world. And,
yeah, I think there's lots to talk about that. And listening to your discography, I definitely picked up on that. So I'm excited to chat with you more about, you know, what this crossover between what you learn in the studio and what you learn on the film set as well. I think it's going to be cool. So Nick, give us an introduction a little bit to your interest. How'd you get from your grandmother's basement to this incredible studio that you're in now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot like Jay, I grew up playing in bands and touring and doing stuff, and then parlayed that into, I figured out like, oh man, touring's cool, but sleeping on couches kind of sucks. And I probably need to figure out a way to make a living. And the thing I knew was music. So I went to school. That's what prompted me to start going to school for it. And then right out of school, I was still recording, you know, my bands in the garage. I was living at home with my grandma, and we had a little bit of a budget. And then we ended up being able to land over at Infrasonic when they had just moved into the studio off of Sunset. And me and Pete just hit it off, and they were looking for somebody to pick up a little bit of slack on the vinyl cutting side of things. And I just jumped at the opportunity. And then from there on, I just, you know, I developed a lot of love and passion for mastering specifically and vinyl stuff. Yeah. So.
And Nick, your instrument is drums, but Jay, your keys?
He's also a drummer.
Yeah, no, actually drums first, guitar, and then a bunch of other stuff that I pretend that I'm really good at.
I'm always fascinated by what instruments people are coming from when they decide to go into the studio.
Yeah.
I don't know I think, Jay, maybe you've been on my friend Matt Boudreau's podcast as well, but another drummer, you know, gone to the studio.
Yes. Yes, I was. I think Nick was as well.
Yeah. I was on Matt's.
Nick, you too? Okay,
yeah,
great.
And it's funny, I have this this theory. Also, Jay's too humble. He's a really saying that he's like thinks he's good at stuff is ridiculous. But I've seen him drum. He's a fucking monster. So, but really, like, I think I have a theory that rhythm players make the best engineers. So I noticed that there's a lot of bass players and drummers, and those tend to be, not always, but tend to be some of my favorite engineers.
You know, I agree with that theory. I just wanted to chime in because I feel like the bass and drummers are like usually the secret heart of the band that like goes unnoticed. You know, lead singers or guitar players get all the praise, but bass and drums like kind of really dictate the move of a song. They can.
Yeah, what's the first rule when somebody's taking a solo is kind of like make space for them, right? Which means that rhythm players, by definition, we spend our time listening carefully to what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Soloists just make a bunch of noise.
Yeah, just, you know.
So tell us about your studios, and you guys feel free to just, go back and forth too. But, how, what are you surrounded by in your two studios? Obviously, Jay, yours is, you got something pretty unusual there with quite so many speakers in there. But then how are they similar, and how do you feel like they're different from each other?
Nick, you want to go first?
Sure. So I guess in my room, we have, a lot of gear. I guess the centerpiece of this room would have to be the Neumann VMS 80 cutting lathe that I have. And that thing's, it's a really cool piece of gear. Not very many people have them. They're hard to maintain. They're hard to operate. They're expensive. So
is this like the very peak of 1970s technology?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the last version of the Neumann lathes to come out. At least one of the last. And this one specifically was built in 1979, and we imported it. Me and my buddy Dylan Constanwall, he had purchased it. I don't remember when, but he purchased it from a DJ in Germany, and it was like in the basement of a chocolate factory that was next door to like a Hells Angels, like German chapter of the Hells Angels motorcycle club.
That's great.
And so he boxed it up, created it, brought it back here. It lived in Michigan for a while, and then slowly but surely over the next several years, I talked him into selling it to me. And then
did you like open it up and find Johnny Depp's hat inside? Or something like that?
Yeah, no, I was expecting some chocolate maybe, but we didn't really get anything out of it. I also really wasn't there when he unboxed the whole thing. I'm just regurgitating a story that he told me about going to get it. And I just, it took me a long time, but I finally talked him out of it and talked him into selling it to me. And it's been awesome ever since. It's been working and operating, I think since it was built. Like, I don't think it ever had a time where it was down for more than like a month, where they were just shipping things and maybe plugging things back in and getting it cutting. So it's been cutting for a long time. It continues to be a workhorse, and I've just refurbished a set of VG66 cutting amps for it. And
I'm familiar with the challenge of keeping a tape machine running, and the value of having a local tech that you can call when you need stuff quickly. I imagine that's even more challenging if you have a 70s cutting lathe.
Yeah, there's literally 2 dudes in the world, well, maybe 3, that can actually work on these things and know what they're doing. There's some new guys coming up that seem to be promising, and I'm excited about that because we need it, because this. A lot of the technology, a lot of the knowledge about this stuff died off when vinyl sort of slumped. And so it's really just been kept alive by the passion and love of people who get into it. And luckily, there's some very smart people who have gotten into it, who have kept, carrying the torch through the years. And I'm lucky to have one of them as one of my really good friends. So he helps me with it. He was just here this week. I had an issue with the monitor card, and we had to fix it. So we do like little late night hangs, grab a tequila drink and some tacos, and fix the lathe. And so this thing's always keeping maintained. It always gets a little touch up, like once a month basically. So
In a way, I can see that as a similarity between your two studios. If some of that how to make records was forgotten, then maybe you're getting to rediscover it for the first time in the same way that, Jay, I imagine doing all this immersive audio feels like a first-time discovery of what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun. It was like it kind of brought me back into working on music as far as mixing, because I was mostly doing post stuff. But we originally built this room. It was meant to be a post facility, actually. It was before like the Apple announcement and stuff, and but I worked with Dolby, and I ended up doing one track. And after I did it, I was kind of like, I don't think that I want to mix anything outside of Atmos, because it's just so fun, and it was so challenging. It was also so like freeing, because it was like everything I thought I knew about recording or mixing suddenly, no longer had walls or barriers. It was just like, experiment and just play. And it was just like being, young again. It was fresh and it was exciting. Yeah. So yeah, it was, it's been great.
That's cool. And of course, I've got a playlist in the show notes, Rockstars, of both Nick and Jay's discographies, so you can go listen to stuff there. It is a Spotify playlist, so you may actually want to go over to, maybe I'll let you explain it, to Jay, of where you think people should go listen to hear the Atmos experience, probably on Apple Music, maybe soon in Spotify by the time this episode comes out.
Apple Music, and there should be, I think, on my website, and I'm not sure if there's links on the Infrasonic one, but there's also an Amazon link to a playlist of stuff, and that one you don't have to have the Apple headphones to listen to the mixes. You can just listen to the regular Dolby binaurals on that one.
So that means with the Amazon ones, you can just plug in regular old headphones, and it'll just play a binaural mix that'll sound right in headphones.
Yeah.
So if you were doing that with regular headphones and listening to Atmos music, and you didn't have the Apple AirPod Pros or something like that, then Apple would say, "Oh, we're just giving you a stereo file." Putting you on the spot right away here.
Wait.
Sorry.
Well, it's more sophisticated than that, right?
Yeah. It is a little more sophisticated than that. Apple also does a thing now where if you have their spatial audio setting turned on, it'll spatialize just every stereo track that's on Apple Music.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it's kind of the Wild West with them a little bit, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to get, and sometimes I'll be listening to stuff and I'm like, this sounds slightly weird or quiet or whatever, and then I notice that even just a regular stereo track has that on it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it has a head tracking. So it's a little, I feel like the controls for that need to be a little clearer, but
there's a lot of options.
Many options. Yeah, many
okay,
options.
Well, maybe we'll re-ask that question too, just to sort of explain, how should we go listen to stuff? My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. And thanks for using our custom link in the show notes. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Go to iZotope.com and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Tell us a little bit about your studio, though. I mean, it sounds like you got a lot of speakers in there. Where let me put it this way. Where the hell are all these speakers?
So yeah, I have a lot of speakers. I actually have more than the 24 now. I think I have, let's see, 24, 29 speakers in this room. So all the speakers are all around me. Actually, when you look around, it's kind of intimidating, because it's like being surrounded by, 8 to 10 or so sets of stereo speakers from, your left to right, up and down, and then on the floor in front of you.
So if you stand up and say hooray in a mix, do you just accidentally punch a hole through one of the speakers?
Well, no, luckily my room's not that small, but sometimes it is, it doesn't feel tight, but it's like you bump into them every once in a while because they need to be in such specific spots. So
for clarity, you're not using all the speakers all the time. It's like a certain array would be if you're mixing an Atmos. A certain array would be if you're mixing a Sony 360.
Yeah, correct. So I share the configuration between the two formats. So really, it's 1116 Atmos with 4 extra channels for the Sony 360, which would be the top center surround, and then the bottom LCR that are part of the Sony 360. And then I have another set of just 2 sets of just alt stereo speakers set up for reference.
Oh, just like in the same way we would listen on our R tones?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can you imagine having to have a complete set of alt Oratones for all the Atmos in 360?
No, I actually, the IK stuff, they're kind of doing that in a way.
Yeah.
Like they make really tiny ones, and they actually sound pretty good, to be honest. Like I was kind of surprised when we were at NAMM. But yeah,
I didn't hear them there, but I saw them listed for sale as like a bundle.
The thing about Atmos though, and I don't know if everyone is aware, but the whole point of all the speakers that they're supposed to be full range, and it's really important that they are. So having the Oratones would not necessarily be that helpful. You'd probably blow them up for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's stay on this topic for just a minute. And again, you guys can feel free to just bounce back and forth too. But that is one of the things I came back from NAMM, and I was so impressed by the sound of what I heard in Atmos there that I thought I need to explore this. I just actually got in a great sounding stereo pair of speakers, and I'm like, all right, now that I just got this, I worked with Carl Tatz, and he put in his Phantom Focus system, so it's really great sound for stereo. But I said, Carl, what do I got to do for Atmos? And he sort of reminded me of what you just said, Jay, which is don't think about all the other speakers as these like, little bonus satellites like you might think.
Yeah.
Traditionally, when you put in a home theater system, you might think big speakers up front, little ones all around the place. It really is meant to be a full range speaker for whatever direction sound is coming at you, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a full range is the way to go, and it's like the speakers I have do a pretty good job, and I just roll them off at I think 80, 83, and I send that to some of the subs I have. But for the most part, you get pretty close. But it would change the way that you would do everything if you really considered them like satellites, where they were just like everything was rolling off at 100 or something. You wouldn't do a lot of what you can do, and what I think is really exciting about the whole Atmos situation.
Yeah, so it does present a challenge, because then you're like, all right, if I needed a space for a pair of for a left speaker up front, I'm going to need that same amount of space everywhere. What are some thoughts about that? Do you see people? Is that what you did? Did you make sure that each one is sort of equal speakers in all direction?
So no, I wish I would probably have to sell my house and my firstborn that I don't have yet to do that. But so I have the PMC wafers, which are the slightly older version of their. I think they're called the CI series now. They were originally like a hi-fi wall speaker, and when I first heard the whole thing Atmos, it was at the PMC showroom here at Lemon Tree, and all their speakers are hidden behind cloth. And when we went and listened, I think Maurice played us like Kanye West. I can't remember which song, but there's a ton of bass, and I kept going like, are there subs in the walls, like in the back? Or there's like, what's going on? I can't believe how much low end I'm hearing from everywhere. And he showed me these speakers, and it was kind of amazing. And so I feel kind of lucky because they're really good speakers, and they do a really good job of like representing a full range. And like I said, they go really low. And so I just roll off the absolute bottom. Just same that you would do if you had like slightly smaller near fields or something, and send it to the subs. And I also find that like, for me, if I wanted to spend more money on an Atmos system, I would probably put subs and do bass management against each wall, just so it was kind of coming directionally from, even though I know it's omni, but it doesn't feel that way sometimes, depending on what you're doing. And it's nice to not have like, if you fill the room with low end for whatever reason, have it all wash at you from the front of the room as opposed to all around you. Or if you're doing things that are
that's sort of a thing I learned recently is, I think when you first discover a sub, you're like, oh, I put one sub in the front, and then you learn you can have stereo subs, but you can have a sub in every corner. Yeah, and it's just making them each do a little less work, maybe.
Yeah, I know in like Room EQ Wizard, it's fun to play around with the room configurator thing, and if you put subs in like every corner, it helps really smooth out some low end stuff with the resonances in a room, because you can kind of tune them differently, and but it's interesting the way that the sub frequencies work in a space and how subwoofers can help.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope I remember to ask you some questions about low end and mixing that way and everything. But let's go to this topic and ask it one more time. For the rock stars listening, how do we go listen to an Atmos mix or a Sony 360 mix? So if you're making these great mixes, unless that's an unfair question, how does our audience go and just hear it and say like, I heard Atmos and I loved it, or
right? I think the main way that people will listen to it now would be Apple Music, probably because most people think of it as spatial audio. And so that would be on Apple branded headphones, the Pros, the Pro Maxes, the Beats now. And I think that's it for now. But you can also listen to it on your laptop. Like you can turn on Dolby Atmos and listen to that version on your laptop, and on the newer ones, I should say, the M1 and up. And it does a really surprisingly good job of giving you that experience.
Okay, so let's clarify that. So when you talk about the Apple branded headphones, you're talking about you've got AirPods or those over the ears, the AirPod.
Yeah, that's the Pros and the
Apple
Maxes
Pros,
now. Yeah. AirPod Pros and AirPod Maxes.
And those are Bluetooth, and they're linked to your computer. So your computer and Apple Music knows that you have the headphones on in that moment, and so it's sending the right sound to them.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah. And then when you talk about listening on the laptop, I guess you could do that same thing, but I think in that case you're saying, are you talking about how the laptop speakers do sort of a binaural effect?
So yeah, like you can turn on Dolby Atmos and listen on your laptop. And the laptop speakers, it's not necessarily a binaural effect. It's they're in the new M1 Mac Pros, I believe there are MacBook Pros, I believe there are 6 speakers, and the same with the the displays and the I believe even the newest iMacs. So the whole point of Atmos in a way is that it's speaker agnostic. It's not really concerned about exactly what speaker configuration you have. It will adapt to the speaker configuration that you have. So,
but it does need to know what speaker configuration it's adapting to, though.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. It needs to know what speakers you have, but it's not concerned. It's not saying like if you have 2 or if you have 10 that it can't do something. It's a coordinates based system essentially. So,
what do you think about this question? So, our listeners, the rock stars are out there. They've got their interface on their computer in the studio, and they've got their favorite pair of headphones. Is that a way to listen to Atmos, or does that cause confusion where, the Apple Music doesn't know what interface you're going through and doesn't know you've just got regular headphones on?
Yeah. So the way that you can do that with any headphones is you can listen on Tidal. You can listen on Amazon Music.
Okay.
And those are just the binaural versions, which are the direct descendant of the Dolby Atmos mix. So you don't need anything to hear those. That's just, you put on your headphones and just go to town. And same with the Sony 360. It's just headphones. It's not any decoder or anything needed. That does get tricky though if you put on if you listen on Apple stuff, because sometimes it doesn't know. You can turn on Dolby Atmos all the time, but you could have on your regular headphones. Then you would have a terrible experience with Dolby Atmos on Apple because it's not being rendered properly.
Right. Because it didn't know what kind of headphones you were wearing in that moment.
Exactly.
Okay, great. That's great. That's actually a really helpful explanation. And that's the first time I've gotten that explanation. So thanks, Jay.
Yeah, no problem.
And I've been looking for that answer for a while. Now, again, unfortunately, you're sort of on the spot to know all these answers, which is not fair, but we're glad that we get to ask you. I also have a Tesla that I think is supposed to have Atmos in it. And in fact, I just went and listened to your discography, and the stuff that was really blowing me away, which we got to talk about here. We can circle back for it, but the Lovecraft, I think that's maybe how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Scream Warriors, unreal. I can't wait till Halloween, and I think Infrasonic East is going to have to host a party and just play that. For everybody.
That'd be amazing.
Do you want to tell us what that is real quick?
Yeah, that record.
Sorry, thanks for being patient, Nick.
No, you're good.
He's got a lot to say about the vinyl stuff.
Yeah, I'll bore everybody in a minute. We'll get real boring.
That Lovecraft record, we did that obviously around Halloween last year. Actually, maybe it was towards the end of the year. It was after Halloween. But it's a handful of like producers, somewhat well-known producers in LA, that every year they do a concept record that's Halloween based. And this year, or that last year, they ended up doing it with composer. And so it's like the most insane record. It's like pop music and hip hop or like rock mixed with like orchestral stuff. And when
mixed with creepy, just straight up creepy.
There is a lot of creepy. I forget about like the I don't everyone should listen to it, whether it's the Atmos version or the stereo version. It's an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's great.
It's so when we kind of got connected, I actually can't remember how we got connected, but they reached out to me. Oh, through Dolby actually. And they reached out to me and they asked me if I was maybe interested, and I kind of told them I was kind of frustrated with a lot of the mixes that I was doing because everyone was, still trying to figure out what Atmos is, how it should be. And at that time, people were kind of trying to put arbitrary rules on things, as opposed, like, for example, how you would use the center channel. No one wanted you to put a vocal in the center channel because they were worried that people were going to rip it and be able to make acapellas or whatever. So you're like putting these, handcuffs on the format a little bit. And it was just like, it was a little bit annoying. And it was also when people were trying to just churn out as much as they could really fast. So mostly everything sounded like a stereo version with like a little bit of reverb around. So when I ended up talking with them, I was like, listen, like I'm really interested in doing this, but I don't want to just do a boring version of a record because it's not, it takes the fun out of it. Like the whole reason I kind of dove into this was because it was so much fun and so inspiring. Yeah. And luckily they were just like, no, we want to make this the most immersive experience you can possibly make. Like you have no rules, go absolutely crazy. And so I did. And then I worked with, one of them to kind of finalize the mixes, and it was great. Like we just tried so many things and went way over the top, maybe at times too much, and sometimes maybe not enough. But like it's I would say it's one of the most challenging Atmos albums you'll hear, probably mix wise, for sure.
It's super cool sounding, and listening to it in the car, I really felt like I was hearing the spatialness of it. Whether it's true Atmos or whether it was sort of a Tesla fake out, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
and now that mix,
it definitely sounded cool.
That mix definitely pushed the limits. I mean, just because we're right next door to each other. Jade pulled me in, and I remember a couple of times. I think you blew a speaker, right? You like blew.
Yeah, we did blow a speaker. Well,
wow.
Because at one point in one of the songs, one of the guys wanted to drop everything down to mono and then spin it around the room. So the entire energy of the song was, going through a single speaker.
Wow.
At all times, and we blew a speaker, but it was totally worth it, like 100% worth it.
So Nick, back to you. It actually sounds like the kind of record that you would make. You do a lot of heavy bands.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that if you want, and tell us more about your thoughts. So, and I do have a spin back from Atmos to vinyl. Will there ever be an Atmos vinyl record, and will you be the one to make it?
We're working on it.
Yeah. We're already thinking about it. So, but yeah, I guess I don't know. Like I do work with a lot of heavy bands because that's sort of my background, and I've garnered a lot of trust in that community, and they know that I'll make it real mean and real loud. So but yeah, like I don't know. Yeah, I get into that stuff. Like me and Jay, we're both like punk kids, and we like things to be like, my whole thing growing up is like I'd hear all these bands I liked and just be like, why does this sound so shitty? Like punk rock and metal doesn't have to sound bad to be punk rock and metal. Like I want it to sound good. And so like that's where a lot of my ethos in mastering comes from, is just like I want like hardcore punk rock and metal, like hi-fi albums. Like I want all the low end, I want all the top end. I want it to be aggressive and in your face and full sounding and rich. I don't want it to be this like tiny, distorted, scratchy garbage or something that sounds like it's got a pillow strangling it to death, like so
what about for the band Strangled Pillow though?
I mean, I guess if they really want to go for that feel.
By the way, when I was in Los Angeles years ago, my buddy Matt and I were walking around Hollywood, and there was a band on the marquee called Pillow of Wrongness, and I just thought that was the greatest band name.
Oh, Jesus.
Sorry, I digress. Go ahead.
So many things, so many painted pictures from that band name. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I like punk rock. I like heavy metal. I can do that stuff. I also do a lot of hip hop. So I work with Egyptian Lover quite a bit.
Nice.
And I really love, like, sort of with the vinyl side of things, it's challenging. There's so many rules that go along with a vinyl record. You don't have, it's not like a digital album where it kind of sky's the limit, or even Atmos where it's like, well, let's push the limits. We have all this space. Like vinyl is very restrictive, where, you got side lengths you got to worry about. You got high frequency content you got to worry about. You got phase you have to worry about. I mean, there's so many things that play into that format to make sure that it sounds good, that you have to, it's like having your record and then you have a box and you have to fit every single record to ever exist into that same size box. Yeah. It can be quite challenging, and it's a lot of fucking fun, to be quite honest with you, with certain genres. I really enjoy doing like dub reggae and hip hop and pop records, because there's so much stuff happening. And in order to make it sound good on a vinyl record, there's a lot of things you got to consider, a lot of things you got to maybe dig in a little harder on and really adjust. And then at the end of the day, we're all used to the sonic profile of a vinyl record. So when you get it right and it sounds awesome, it's just like, hell yeah. Like,
yeah. Now, is that at the mixing stage or the mastering stage, or just both for you?
I mean, like, you mean for me as a mixing engineer, or?
Well, these things that you're talking about, getting them to fit into
okay.
And be appropriate on vinyl.
Well, that kind of leads into like a whole nother thing. So like mixing for sure is it. I mean, in the best case scenario, a mixing engineer and a producer and an artist would be thinking like, oh, this is going on vinyl. So, considering that this is going to go on vinyl eventually, we're going to make sure that we do things within the parameters of that. Like we're not going to go and blast like 20 kilohertz at like full scale at some point in the song, right, or just run white noise randomly in like an area, or, I'm being really general and really like on the nose about it right now, talking about it. But yeah, I mean, if you think back to when vinyl was in its heyday, like producers, that was the main format that records were coming out on. So they were sculpting the record and producing it and doing things specifically for that format to shine at its best. So nowadays, it's sort of flipped on its head where vinyl is a thing. Labels want to put it out because it's money. It's a physical media. People really love it. It's making a resurgence. But it's always an afterthought almost with any major release. It seems like it's always like, oh, we're doing the digital stuff. We'll make sure it's going to sound great on Spotify and iTunes. And then the vinyl version, we're just going to have the pressing plant cut it and make it. And it's like, it doesn't really do it justice for the format. Like the format really requires a lot more care than that. And dynamic range is helpful. Like considering the track listing and the lengths of the sides is really imperative. It's something that they used to do a lot of, and nowadays there's like, well, we want the side split to be here, and it's like 28-minute A side and then a 19-minute B side, and it's like, well, if we split it up a little bit more equally, we'd have a better sounding record overall. And there's just a lot of conversations that I end up having to have nowadays where it's like, okay, I'm gonna put the stop sign up and I'm gonna be a pain in everybody's neck because I want this to sound good and I care about the format, and we're gonna put our best foot forward on this. And if we don't all see eye to eye on it, then then maybe we just don't do it. So
yeah, but it's cool that you're doing that, because I remember, in the 90s, the bands I was in, maybe we still put out a vinyl, but it always just felt like this totally, like nobody was even listening to the sound quality of what was getting done.
Yeah.
It was totally an afterthought at that point.
Yeah. And I feel like it's even more that nowadays where, it is a commodity and they treat it as such, and they have no shame in treating it as a commodity. So it's like not as much care and deliberate thought goes into it on the front end, which just ends up being, sort of a mediocre product at the end of the day. And then, with vinyl prices being the way they are, I'm like, well, let's at least make it sound awesome. Like, let's try to do something with this. So I don't know.
So when you say vinyl prices where they are, do you refer to that meaning that they are sort of set a little bit higher today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, vinyl records today, like some of them are like pushing $40-$50 a record. Whereas in the past, you go to a record store, like even in early 2000s when I was just getting into vinyl, I could go to a record store and pick a brand new record up for like $15. And now it's exorbitantly priced. And it just, like unpopular opinion, maybe I'll get sniped out for this by some people, but But it sucks. I mean, I wanna put out good sounding records, and like I'm lucky and grateful to be able to work with the clients that I work with. It seems like the indie labels are picking up a lot of that, in which I'm throwing down, where it's like, no, we want it to sound good. This is our fan base that we want to take care of. We want to make sure this record sounds good. So whatever we need to do on the front end, let's do that and ensure that down the line, this record sounds good on everything, not just streaming platforms, and then everything else is sort of just make it work.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Now, this is a question for both you guys, but would you agree that the low end of records has really just changed over the decades? So if you were, I first noticed this when I was just like pulled up, Spotify streaming or whatever, and I was just like play old school hip hop playlist. And I was listening to stuff and I heard the low end, and then it was like, play new school hip hop. I don't even think you call it new school. I think it was just like, play hip hop, you know? And it was like a completely different kind of low end and everything.
Yeah.
And it hit me at the time, and I was like, oh, wow, this is like probably exactly what you were talking about, which is, you know, it's like the octave just dropped completely down in pitch, rather, because of the change of format from vinyl to digital.
But also, we talk about this a bit, actually. Also, the speakers and what's in control rooms and stuff. And like, if you think about a lot of those records that you're thinking about, almost all of them were done in NS10s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also rooms that were just not tuned.
Tuned, exactly. But that was the thing. It's like, you know, every record I ever made, anything below like 80 or something, it was always just kind of like, you ignore that, just roll that off. Like, no one cares about that. And like, you can hear that. You go back, you listen to like great sounding records, but you're like, there's absolutely no low end. And so it's like so drastically different now. It's interesting. I know a lot of people say it's too much, but it's like, with certain genres, it really works because that's where all the energy is, you know?
You mean by including bass now?
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, it's a shifting format, but the more I try and learn it and understand it, the more I can really appreciate it.
Yeah. But it's the opposite of what Nick has to deal with. It's like, it's probably the bane of your existence, right?
So, I mean, in some instances, but I could get into some more nerdy vinyl shit in a second, but I wanted to touch on another thing just because you brought it up, like also considering, you know, old school hip hop, a lot of that stuff is ripped from a vinyl record. So like a lot of those samples,
so it wasn't even there. Yeah.
They're just recording off of a vinyl record. So it's not even there to begin with. But then, you know, you push into, you know, modern days like today, a lot of people are using samples that have been processed and perfectly tuned specifically to have that sub octave, and it's like super clean digital samples now. So,
and on top of that, there's in samples, there's always too much low end. Everything is like produced like it's, you know, a final mix, which is kind of crazy. It's a lot to deal with sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes as I explore digital synths and get excited about Serum and Ableton Live and all these things that are out there, and I listen through the presets, I begin to notice that where I'm like, wow, every preset sounds gigantic.
Yeah, it's
like
20 to 20 of everything. You can't use. It's the only thing you can use. It's pretty insane. Yeah. I will say though, it's fascinating because, you know, since we're talking about low end, like some of the electronic music that exists, the way that they can shape all of that stuff to keep so many frequencies at all times is pretty impressive. And it fascinates me because I'm like, I don't know how you guys do it.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Do you guys have some experience creating electronic music yourselves? I mean, Jay, I'm guessing you...
Jay does.
Yeah, I'm guessing you do. I saw you had all the keyboards in the background there, and then also if you're in film, you kind of have to. That, right?
Yeah, I have to make, I would say like these days, like probably 80% of the music I make is electronic or electronic based, you know, or a combination thereof, whether it's like, orchestral with electronic elements or, you know. So it's like a language that I kind of forcefully had to learn. I was a big punk rock kid, but also later in life, like I was a really big psych rock fan. Like I was just like real instruments, real music. And then
like Pink Floyd?
Yeah, well, no, I mean like really obscure psych rock. Even like Pink Floyd may have been like the start of it in some degree, but
how about the Happy Flowers?
I don't know.
I'm stumping you guys.
No, it's not. No, but when I say,
okay. Come on, Jay, flex on us. Come on, Jay.
No, I don't want to flex. Like, for example, if you were going to say Pink Floyd, I would say Syd Barrett Pink Floyd versus the other Pink. Totally. So like that era, like, you know, 50s psych rock.
Saucer full of secrets.
Yeah, there you go. So, I don't even remember where I was going.
It's all right. I tend to do that to people. Sorry.
So the point was, so at some point, like, you know, music has been, to me, there was a period in the mid to 2010s or whatever, where music was kind of frustrating because it didn't seem to have like a clear direction. And also I wasn't, big on a lot of like pop music or commercial stuff or like that production styles of electronic music. And I had to like force myself to be a little more open-minded and to do so. Like I use Ableton Live, and I used to have to make like for commercials and stuff, it'd be like, make this sort of DJ track, make this sort of EDM song, make this. So I had to learn how to do all that stuff. And it's, to be honest, it's like kept, music really close and personal, because it just kept me excited about doing stuff, as opposed to being like, well, I only want to play guitar, I only want to play drums. It was like, well, how can I incorporate things that, that I've learned over the years into this new kind of format and style. So tons of electronic stuff, and it's part of the sonic fingerprint of the times, really. It's like,
yeah. And Nick, I think some of your playlists too. I don't remember if it was maybe Momentum or one of those bands, starting out with some big synth sounds.
Yeah,
maybe it was Greatest Grinds.
It seems like a lot of the heavier music is now integrating a lot of electronic music into it, and samples and like 808 kick drums and lots of other stuff that kind of gets blended into it. So hip hop and punk rock and heavy music always have been sort of parallel universes to each other, and they kind of intertwine. So yeah, it's definitely becoming more of a thing now. It's awesome because I can just make things, soundscapes are bigger, things are more produced, it sounds better. So it's exciting.
That was a thing that Joe Baldridge brought up here. He's at Belmont University here, but he brought that up in his interview, was that synths, you introduce this full scale to music making that's just massive, that never existed before, really.
Yeah.
Even if you look at old synthesizer records, like Tomita or like, Walter Carlos and stuff like that, they weren't nearly as huge sounding as the modern stuff.
Totally. Yeah. Bandwidth is much larger now, and it's people taking advantage of it. It's cool.
So let me ask this question to both you guys. What is mastering, and how does it get done?
It's super fucking easy. No, I joke about it because everyone, like, there's this saying that's so annoying. It's like, mastering's a dark art. It's like, no, it's not. It's literally using all the same tools any other engineer would use. It really comes down to your perspective and how you use the tools, and like, like what you pay for with mastering is not just like tools and not just like plugins or whatever. It's you're paying somebody who sits in front of speakers day in, day out to use their ears that they've spent 10 plus years training, listening to different genres, to fine tune and take your record to the finish line. And that's really what you're paying for in mastering. That's what it is. It's not a dark art. It's just paying someone with a whole lot of skill that they spent a whole lot of time and effort honing to just help you across the finish line.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's mastering to me. I think we share similar views and maybe slightly different ones at times, Nick and I. But I just try to let the song or album tell me what I need to do. It's like sometimes you don't need to do much, and sometimes there are tons of problems. And as a mixer, I also know when you're mixing something, sometimes you just have to get across the finish line, and there's problems that are left over, and you don't know how to address them, or you're just too bogged down by the whole experience to address them. And then you have a new, fresh pair of ears that can critically, maybe help fix a few flaws, or maybe add something that, you were missing because of the process. So I feel like it's not magic anymore. It used to feel like that, everyone, but it's like there's a skill to it for sure. And that skill is, like Nick said, it's like, listening and moving things half a dB. Most people would be like, it's not doing anything. Well, that's not true at all. It's doing quite a bit. And, it can change the whole character of a record if you do it wrong or if you do it right. And that isn't a skill to have, ears that are that sensitive to that sort of thing and know when and where to do that.
Do you guys feel, there's this idea that sometimes you can just work a song to death in production and mixing? Do people sometimes have that experience in mastering as well? I don't feel like I hear that mentioned as much. Seems like mastering, you guys know what to do and you get the job done.
I think there's...
Don't get stuck.
I feel like there's probably, to some degree.
Yeah.
At a certain level, as a mastering engineer, another hot take from me is, you work with the engineers you work with and the producers and people, their skills grow with your skills. And at some point you don't have to do as much and it becomes a lot more of a streamlined process, and it's easier to, touch a couple things up and that's all you got to do because that's all the song calls for. But, at the lower levels, like entry level engineers, people who are mixing it themselves, doing things like, you can definitely get a little bit turned upside down in the mastering process if you care about trying to make it sound really good and be the best it could possibly be. Because then you're trying to fix mix issues at the mastering stage because the band doesn't have any idea of how to fix it, or they've just hit the end of their rope and you're just trying, like for me, the sky's the limit. And I'm like, well, if I need to push this much, I'm not afraid to push, like, if it needs it, like 3 dB of EQ into something. I'm not afraid of doing excessive amounts of, not excessive, but a lot more compression than you would normally do if the song calls for it. And I think in those instances with mixes that are not fully put together, or, something that's a little bit more problematic, it can take you down a rabbit hole. But
you've got all that experience to know when it's time to make a bold move.
Yeah, exactly.
My hot take for Nick is like, he and I, like, we'll work on stuff together. Sometimes we'll just spend hours just working on a track that he's working on or I'm working on, just playing with it. What I've noticed, I feel like over the years, is that because the barrier of entry into kind of all aspects of recording or production of music has gone down, so has the overall quality. And I feel like sometimes, like, there's a general rule about mastering where it's like, you don't want to push more than 3 dB. That's kind of the max. There are times where I'll push things 6, 9 dB if I have to, because there are literal problems with a mix. And if it fixes a problem that makes a client happy, then you do what you need to do. But back to what you were saying, I feel like mastering engineers aren't required to go down the rabbit hole. It's not part of the job, requirement, like mix engineers. So it's like you can get lost in it for sure, but usually that's just someone who really cares, like Nick was saying, that really wants to kind of, do some sort of corrective thing. But, overall, you're supposed to, keep the feel and the energy and just the life of the record alive and maybe enhance it a little bit. It's not like you're remixing the song. So it's like it can be a little bit easier, but there's a lot more to do, I feel like, these days than there probably ever was.
Definitely.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common? They all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music to the style that they want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's super fun to create a string section for a rock band. Come on, go get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Atom Audio. introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings to allow you to customize your Atom audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-size rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Atom audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show, aka I don't know what to call it. And my guests are Nick Townsend joining us and Jay Clark from Infrasonic West Studios out in Los Angeles. We're going to jump back in and keep talking about, vinyl versus Atmos and making great records. So, Nick and Jay, you ready to jam?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
All right, so I was joking about this with you a little bit off to the side, but I've gotten into the habit of going over and asking the artificial intelligences, ChatGPT, to give me some good questions. So it spit out this funny list where it like separated them all for you guys. It's like, the first one is, Nick, as someone who has mastered over 2,000 vinyl records, how do you approach vinyl mastering compared to mastering other formats? So would you like to, shall we field a couple of these and then we'll go back to my questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
All right, what's your thought on that one?
Well, yeah, so the difference is obviously going to be for digital, there's loudness points where people generally like them. So I'm squishing the dynamic range a little bit and like doing a little bit more work to make sure that it's louder. And so with the vinyl side of stuff, I'm trying to avoid certain things like, if I can avoid clipping, or if I can give it some breathing room, some dynamic range, that's always going to be translating a little bit better on vinyl. So that amongst other things, I'll try to fine tune. Like, I'm always checking phase. I'm always checking the side links and the track order, because there's certain limitations with vinyl. Like there's distortion, there's inner diameter distortion and high frequency loss. So at a certain diameter of the disc, you start to have this problem come up, and it's a tracking thing. So I can lay the same amount of, like, the same bandwidth of frequencies. It's all there. But because of the way that a vinyl record tracks, you always have this problem. It's been on every record since the dawn of time. And this is also why people like 45 RPM, in some cases over 33 RPM, because at the slower rotational speed, you tend to have a lot more of this problem become apparent. So you have more distorted. It seems more distorted. It seems like you're losing a lot more top end. Whereas when you're playing it back 45, you're cutting 45 and you're playing back 45. The groove kind of, how do I say this? I like to use visuals when I'm explaining this because it's a lot easier to understand. But if you could think of like riding a dirt bike and you're going over whoops, like these little, you know what I'm talking about? Like these little whoops, and you're just kind of skipping over the top of them. But if you were to spread those whoops out and make them a little bit longer, then you're kind of rolling over top of them, and you're not, your wheels are touching every part of the surface of the dirt road there. Whereas when you're hitting whoops, you're just skipping over the tops. And sort of a similar thing, it's maybe a bad analogy, but it's a similar idea when you're doing 33 RPM versus 45. 45, the groove gets spread out a little bit longer. It's a little easier to track. So you end up with less distortion and a little bit more high frequency retention at that speed. And for 33, those grooves are, it's cutting that same amount of energy into a much more smaller space. So the tracking on your tone arm has a lot harder of a time tracking that and playing it back properly without any kind of issue.
Yeah.
So all those things are things I'm considering when I'm doing vinyl versus digital. And, there's other little tricks of the trade where, just something as simple as making sure that the ballad is the last track of the A side versus having it open the whole record and then having the last track be a total raging basher where it's just like cymbals and everything that can distort will distort at the very last track of the song or the very last track of the record. So there's a lot of things I consider between the two. And yeah, there you go.
What are typically some of the best sounds that are most appropriate for that distortion of the end of the record? Applause?
So typically the way I think I understand your question, the way that it used to be done is that they would take like an acoustic song and then that would be the end of the side. And all the other songs, like the single on the record that's going to be the loudest and it's going to be having the most energy and it's going to be, having drums and cymbals and guitars and everything. That'd be reserved for the outside edge because that's the first 2 inches on an album are the best sound quality wise on an album. Mm-hmm. Because once you get past, that you start to slowly have that distortion, the tracking issues start to come into play. And they vary in intensity depending on your cartridge, your setup, your all these things sort of all play in together. So typically you would, the best thing for the last track on an album is going to be a ballad or something with the least amount of energy, like a singer-songwriter thing where it's like just guitar and vocals or a piano ballad or, whatever. But typically that would be the best for a longer side. If your sides are under 18 minutes and under for a 33 RPM 12-inch, then you don't have to worry as much because it's not going to make that big of a difference. But once you start to push beyond that, you start to have these issues creep in and become more of an issue. And, you can make it sound worse by putting, a really heavy hitting track at the end of an album there.
Yeah. Did all the psych rock records save their acoustic psychedelic ones for the last song on each side?
I don't know. I think the good ones probably do.
Jay, any thoughts there?
Well, no, I am a vinyl collector, but I am a dummy when it comes to cutting vinyl or anything else.
Nice. Would you guys like to know what the artificial intelligences thought your answer might be, Nick?
Yeah. Ooh. Oh, hell yeah. They're going to give me some technical ass shit.
Entertainment value. As an AI language model, I cannot accurately predict Nick's answer to this question since I do not have access to his thoughts or opinions. Don't worry, Nick, that's coming. By the time you guys come up with an Atmos vinyl record, it will figure out how to do that.
I know, just tap into my brain.
However, based on his expertise in mastering vinyl records, it is likely that he will discuss the unique challenges and considerations involved in vinyl mastering compared to other formats, such as the need to account for physical limitations of the medium and the importance of preserving the warmth and character of the original recording. He may also discuss his specific techniques and tools used in the vinyl mastering process, to which I asked, what if he draws an analogy to riding a dirt bike? And the answer is, without further context, it's difficult to know exactly what Nick would mean by drawing an analogy to riding a dirt bike. However, in general, when somebody draws an analogy to riding a dirt bike, they may be referring to the need to constantly adjust and adapt to the changes in the terrain in order to maintain control. In the context of mastering vinyl records, this could mean that Nick needs to be constantly adjusting and tweaking the sound to ensure that it sounds good on the specific format of vinyl, which can be finicky and require more attention than other formats.
Oh, man. That's pretty
so
good.
It should have concluded by saying, Jay, thank you for your patience. Your question is coming next.
Oh, man.
All right, Jay, are you ready for one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so here comes question number 2. I'll put on my best AI voice. Jay, Having worked with both Dolby Atmos and Sony 360RA, what similarities and differences do you find in creating immersive soundscapes in these two formats?
Well, Chat GPT, you know, funnily enough, like when I do both or at the same time, I treat them exactly the same initially, meaning that I will generally do like a 7-1-2 mix that I will then either make stems of, put into new sessions for each one, and kind of then pan things around accordingly. So it's like a lot of times they're based. I treat them the same initially. I'll just do the mix and then make stems, put the stems in there. But internally, the differences are basically in the binaural. The room stuff is like, you know, I'm listening to the same speakers, same tuning. You know, I get it sounding good in the room. It doesn't matter which one. But the binaurals are very different. The Sony one, to me, is a more convincing immersive sound. It's you really feel the dimension in it. But it also has like a bit of like a high-end graininess to it. And it doesn't like we were talking about before, like the full range of everything. If there's too much information in a lot of tracks above like 10K and up, it really pushes that up, and you kind of have to do a lot more cutting of the high frequencies than you would normally do for a stereo, because it just...
That's sort of similar to vinyl a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. It is actually, in a way, quite a bit similar to it. It's like, it's very strange, and like it's kind of cool though, but I've learned all these new techniques that like producers are using, where they're doing all this crazy stuff with vocals, where they'll take they're probably doing like, you know, like a Dolby thing with the high end, but they'll flip them out of phase and just put them on the sides. And so there's just like this cranked high end thing, but it you know, generally disappears when you're listening in mono or whatever. It doesn't, you know, build up. But in the binaural stuff, it just sounds absolutely insane. So the biggest difference is the binaural and just like tweaking it. And then, you know, Sony, the binaural, their renderer, you kind of have to use the positioning almost as an EQ, because it really colors the sound. It's like you go up, you go down, and it's wildly different. Where the Dolby stuff is, it's much more subtle, and it seems to be more of a volume thing. So those are the biggest differences between the two.
Okay, cool. And then, you know, I remember when I was interviewing Frank Filippetti, he was sort of a big fan of Sony 360 as well, and had some things to say about it. So if I hear you, I'm just throwing it out there for no particular reason, but when I hear you talk about starting a mix, you're sort of like, if you're going to take a sound and have it be over on the side to your left, you're essentially approaching the mix where you're like, I want it to be on the side of the left if it's the Atmos version, and I want it to be on the side of the left if it's the Sony version, and I'm just preparing both those versions to give me that result.
I mean, I essentially will just, in my head as I'm doing it, because I'm not, you know, if I'm doing 7-1, like I'm not really going to get the proper sides image, but I'm planning in my head. So I'm making calls in my head ahead of time, and then I'll do final tweaks. And if it doesn't work, then, you know, I'll change it once I put it actually in the final session. But yeah, generally it's like I decide where I want things to be placed. A lot of times I'll make special versions of tracks where I'll do reverb tricks or other modulation tricks, and I'll print those, and then I'll just have these extra stems of like effects and things that I can then pan around. But those are tools I use to kind of make things more spatial.
Nice. Well, would you like to know what the artificial intelligences thought your answer might be?
I would love it.
Okay, all right. So here's what it said. I'm sorry, as an AI language model, I cannot predict with certainty what a person's answer will be. However, based on my knowledge, Jay might answer that both Dolby Atmos and Sony 360RA offer immersive sound experiences that allow for creating three-dimensional soundscapes. However, there may be differences in the technical aspects of how they process and encode the sound, as well as in the tools and workflows used for creating content in each format. Additionally, Jay might also discuss any unique challenges or advantages they've encountered when working with each format. A little generic on that one.
Yeah, but pretty good if you know how to, read between the lines.
Yeah, exactly. And then and so I said, well, what about the binaural results in his answer? And he says, or it says, both Dolby Atmos and Sony 360RA aim to provide immersive audio experiences, but they may differ in their approach to binaural recording. Dolby focuses on object-based audio where individual sounds are placed in a three-dimensional space. It uses metadata to position sounds accurately, including overhead and surrounding positions. This can create a sense of height and depth. On the other hand, Sony employs an array of speakers to create a three-dimensional audio. I think it got lost.
Yeah, that's not, Sony is also object-based,
This is great. That's why I like doing it. We just
Sorry,
debunked.
robot. You can't take my job
robots.
yet.
You got it wrong. Okay, cool. So let me go back and get our wheels back on the tracks here.
Oh, man, I want to stump a robot.
You want to stump a robot? All right, I'm dropping an intro marker for that one right there. All right, so let me go to this one. Maybe you guys can stump each other. What questions do you guys want to ask each other? I mean, you probably ask each other questions every day since you're living in studios right near each other. But Jay, whoever wants to go first, what question do you want to ask the other about either each other's formats that you're working on or your own?
Okay, how about Nick?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. Do you believe that clipping, if used, should happen before or after limiting?
I think it depends.
And why?
Oh, man. I think it depends. I think you could do it before or after. I don't think that there's really technically a big reason why you couldn't do it either way. I typically do it before limiting because I feel like it smooths. I feel like the limiting helps obviously keep overs from happening. It kind of smooths out some of the clipping. I guess clipping I would do on the front end if there was some really heavy transient material that was hitting the limiter too hard and I want it to be a little bit more transparent. And then clipping behind the limiter might be, the inverse where it's like, I just want to tickle the top of some of these things and add a little bit more harmonic.
Rub a little sand on the mix at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you guys also explain what clipping and limiting is?
Clipping, well, Jay, why don't you fucking take that one?
Who, me?
Yeah, dude, you.
Well said. Well asked, Nick.
Well said. Limiting is basically a in really high or infinite ratio compressor, which will let nothing over the threshold. It's actually pretty simple. Limiting, brick wall limiting. Clipping is now actually technical term for that. Nick, what is clipping exactly?
Lopping off the tops of waveforms.
It's essentially like square waving. But yeah,
that's what I was. I've got guesses, or I've got what I think it is, but that's what I would say, right?
Yeah,
it's limiting is actually very quickly grabbing the volume knob and turning things up or down.
Yeah.
To accommodate,
it pushes it down.
Just literally says we're not going to mess with it. We're just literally not going to mess with it.
So I guess I should have explained better because I presume that everyone would know what a compressor does. But yes, it pushes the signal down, whereas Clipper says you no longer exist signal. It just takes it away.
Yeah, you hit the threshold and now you die. So
correct.
Yeah. I am totally blown away with Isotope Ozone, rock stars. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The The Mastering Assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need to get a professionally targeted result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And don't get me started on Master Rebalance, which literally lets you reach into the mix and manipulate the vocals, bass, and drums at the mastering stage. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval, I get comments back like, "Holy shit, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, dude, you're a wizard. Finally, I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge." Check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great plugins at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. So, and I guess because it's pushing it up and down, you might be inclined to hear that at times.
Yeah.
And you might like or not like the sound of that. And in clipping, like a distortion on a guitar, it creates all this, bigness and harmonic content and everything. And distortion.
And distortion, yeah.
And that can be really pleasant, or it could be maybe a bad idea.
Yeah, it depends. Depends on, the material going into it. Like Nick was saying, if it's really transient stuff, you don't hear that as much because it's such a fast distortion that you can get away with like a higher amount. But if it's the crest factor of stuff is lower, you're going to hear a little bit more of that.
It's going to get dirty
distortion, but it could be pleasing. Like, if you have electronic stuff, you can get away with a lot more clipping than you can with like a rock band. You can do a lot of it, but you'll hear it in rock music. It's like, depending on what it is, like it might just sound like the guitars are more distorted.
Yeah.
But super clean, like electronic stuff, it's like you can really destroy that stuff and get away with a lot.
Do you think that's because the rock band stuff, your ear picks up on the changing of reality of the sound a little bit? Or is it, or is it vice versa in EDM, the electronic stuff? It's such a pure... basic signal that you're just sort of adding harmonics.
That's it. I think it's just that it's so pure that it's like, closer to being just a pure sine wave generally. So the richness isn't there. Whereas, so you're actually kind of making that feel more familiar because...
You're helping.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas, most stuff, if you're just recording a band, like it's already gone through so many stages of probably picking up some sort of harmonic distortion that it doesn't need help.
Totally.
Let's take limiting and clipping into the mix.
Okay.
Like we're going into the mix now, gentlemen. Where are some appropriate places to whip out a clipper or a limiter?
Oh, there's a lot more appropriate
in the mix.
places in the mix.
Yeah.
You got
That's true.
a lot of options in the mix side of things. I haven't mixed in a long time, but so Jay'd probably be better off with this one. But
so yeah, it's funny. I was actually thinking about this earlier. I'll use clipping. I'll use both a lot on percussion things. Anything with lots of transients. I will use clipping on, like drums, kick drum, snare drum. I'll use a clipper sometimes because it adds character, it adds color, a little, a little crunch, a little whatever. But and one of my favorite ways actually is the what is it? The Waves J37. That thing will eat transients and like you won't even notice it if you just lightly tap it. It's really nice.
Right. So analog tape is a form of clipping. It's just maybe a gentler one, or
yeah, exactly. It can be. It depends on how hard you hit it. But for some reason, that one in particular, that plugin in particular, you don't even need to hit 0 on the meter, which I assume would be like -18. And
you just sound like the Beatles instantly.
Yeah, it just absorbs it a little bit. It's really nice. But so, and then limiting, I use limiting a lot of times. I mix to food groups, which I know some people don't like, but I will use limiting a lot of times on groups. Drums, a drum group, I might use some limiting on. A vocal, I might use some limiting on if I really need to squeeze it and keep it, kind of tight. But not the kind of like, I'm talking like, half a dB max, just if I need to push something up and I just don't want any overs at all. Not really squishing it down or anything like that. Now, acoustic guitars, sometimes you gotta do those things dirty. You might have to, get 5-6 dB.
Yeah. Some of it's like the really transient stuff that, it'll be pokey in a mix unless you control a lot of that dynamic range and fill it out. So I feel like, clipping, there's many different forms of clipping and there's many different ways of using it. And like, I think, it adds a nice saturation. It can help with, being a transparent way of getting the dynamics of a particular instrument controlled and then fitting better in a mix. So
the THD distortion part of a distressor, for example, that would you think of that as a form of clipping? Like if you start pushing into that, you're like the arouser plugin lets you dial up that aspect of it. Yeah,
the arouser, I would consider that more saturation than clipping, but it does a similar thing. It just depends on which one. Like the THD on the distressor, I believe there's both second and third order harmonics. So the clippers are a little more. The distortion is not as, or the saturation, it's not as precise and musical. It's not always. Like you could really smash like a guitar into a distressor and it comes out very musical.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to do the same amount in a clipper.
Yeah.
I believe Billy Decker, when he was on the show, talked about liking clippers for acoustic guitars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I guess that's because an acoustic, it's got all that spiky pick action on it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing about mixes. Transients are so tricky because you don't want to kill all your transients, but if everything is just spiky, it's distracting at times. So you got to know when to use it. And I feel like, I think the whole analog versus digital thing, it's like the only thing that I care about with that stuff is how people record things. And when you're recording in studios, running things through compressors and outboard gear and stuff, it was all getting just a little bit of that lopped off. And, that's the main reason why I use most of that stuff is just to take care of some of that stuff that was naturally getting eaten up back in the day.
Here's a use case scenario for maybe both you guys. When you've got a snare and you're sort of in the mix stage, and the snare's just kind of quick and thumping, but you wish it sounded a little more explosive in the room. What are some places you go to try and resculpt the snare a little bit?
EQ. If it's thumping like that, I mean, go ahead, Jay.
No, I'm listening.
Oh yeah, I mean EQ compression, I think would do the trick on that, because if it's thumping, but if it's thumping, you can always get in there and you can sculpt it with EQ to pull out more of what you want and push down some of what you don't want. Dynamic EQ would be a good option too, and then compression, obviously like kind of just sculpting it to hit the way you want it to hit using your attack and release times and just sitting there fiddling with it until you get it where you want it.
Yeah. I'm a big parallel person, so I would probably do some sort of extreme parallel compression. And probably some sort of extreme parallel distortion, and then just choose the level between those three things to kind of get the vibe I want. And because, with snares, it's tricky, like the body of a snare, sometimes it's easy to get rid of too much of it, or it's to leave too much of it where it sounds too thumpy. So, you can do a lot with level with that. Like if you're really compressing the shit out of something and you get in that kind of explosiveness that you're talking about, you can pull down the raw a little bit, but keep a little bit of that original character and the thickness and not lose it all, because you're going to lose a bit of that when it's really squashed. And just balancing, a lot of parallel things can be a really good way to kind of get.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on a snare. I was working on a snare this morning that, my feeling was like the snare sounds cool, but it's sort of quick and short. And I wish it had that sort of more length to it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about some of these EDM videos I've watched recently where people just talk about, reminding us of this idea that a sense of loudness is sort of loudness over time. And so when we extend the length of a sound, it's, even if at a quieter level, it sounds louder.
Yeah.
Do you, when you're doing parallel compression and you're really digging into something like a snare, do you sidechain gate it as well sometimes, because you're, to try and manage the fact that you just brought out all the cymbals that were screaming through there as well?
Yeah, I would gate it before I sent it to that stuff for sure. So I would, set it up where I was gating it, or I would, depending if I was already like kind of happy with the overall snare sound, I might just make a committed version and even go in and manually shape it each hit, which can be a nightmare, but sometimes you have to do that because, it depends on how it's played.
That works a lot better for a 3-minute song than it does for a 2-hour podcast.
It sure does.
Yeah.
All right, Nick,
Yes, sir.
Here's one for you. How can the loudest punk rock music in the world also be right for vinyl records?
Oh man, just choosing the format. I mean, I do a lot of screaming loud records, and it's because they're like 8-minute sides, and I'll cut them 12-inch 45, and that takes a lot more level than your average 12-inch 33 RPM record would, and I'm able to leave a lot of the high frequency stuff. A lot of that sizzle can get through, and really all I'm worried about with that at that point is tracking distortion, which is fixed by the 12-inch 45 RPM format, at least, and the side lengths, and then I'm worried about like high frequency spikes. So I'll typically, preview the audio, do a test cut, and make sure that if I need to throw a de-esser on the mix or on the master before it hits the lathe, I'll do that, and just try to catch the like really high energy transient stuff. So, and the reason that I do that because there's actual circuit breakers on my amplifiers to protect the cutter head. Because if you send too much energy, at those,
you'll burn it out,
you'll destroy the cutter head. So.
And then you got to call that one of 2 people in the world.
Yeah, and then they're like, we don't fix cutter heads, sorry. But yeah, so yeah, you can really get a screaming loud record if you know, if you pay attention to this, like what the format is, and make sure that your side lengths are appropriate. You can cut a really loud one. I mean, I cut stuff that's like 3-4 dB over standard level all the time for stuff that's formatted properly. So short sides and 45 RPM.
I don't know if it was for volume reasons, but see if I'm remembering this right. Was it John Fry at Ardent Studios? Like when he was doing Big Star Records, I'd hear these stories of him with a can of Freon, like spraying the cutting needle in this right in the moment just to get the most high as possible on the record.
Oh, that sounds crazy. I would never spray anything onto the record as it's getting cut.
I'm probably butchering this story.
I think probably maybe what you're thinking or where it's coming from that's been handed down is that on the Neumann cutting lathes, there is because the coils produce heat because of the energy getting sent to the cutter head. We do use helium. There's channels cut in and around the coils inside of the cutter head that allow you to inject helium into it to cool the coils down as it's cutting. So I have a big ass tank of helium next to my lathe, and everyone's like, "What are you doing?" I'm just like making balloons in here. But what I'm doing is I'm injecting helium directly into the cutter head as I'm cutting to make sure that I can cut louder records. I can handle some of that high frequency stuff without potentially putting my cutter head at risk. And
hey, when I put helium in me, my voice goes way up, so it's got to help the high end on a record.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. It puts an RIAA curve on your voice, and you can just. But that's probably what you're thinking, or where that story comes from or originates from. Is we use helium to cool the cutter head down to make sure that we can cut louder records.
Awesome. I think I was being affected by the artificial intelligences. I was starting to get my facts wrong, so thank you for straightening
me
out. Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. All right, Jay, how does the electronic world of music lend itself to immersive audio? Like, what have you learned about low end from EDM tracks like Chemical by MK? Does that actually help you inform your other projects and mixes and masters as well?
Initially, low end in Atmos can be kind of tricky because you can it can be easy to do too much, add too much. You have a full LFE channel just waiting for all the sub information. So, like with anything, it's like you got to be familiar with your environment, your speakers, and everything, and reference things because it's just challenging. So, the one thing I will say about the low end with Atmos stuff that's interesting is that with the LFE, and I know I've noticed that a lot of people have stopped using it. You have to be really careful of that crossover and what you're sending it because you're going to cause a bit of a phase issue with anything that you're sending to any of the other speakers. So it's usually good to kind of create new content or be very specific with what you're sending it. Because otherwise, you can. I've had mixes where in the room, I was tweaking stuff and I got it sounding right, and I put on the headphones, and either it's like way too loud or it just totally disappears. Or there's a hole. So you got to really listen to that, and you got to be aware of how your room is set up because it's usually going to be a room thing, but how it's going to translate into all the other formats. Because there's so many.
So if you
go for it,
if you do tricks like splitting the bass, that's one that can work in a mix where you split the bass up into some a low channel and sort of an upper mid channel.
Yep.
Do you still do a similar thing mixing in Atmos, or in immersive, or do you actually like do new kind of splits because you're trying to just target that sub in just the right way?
So I would do new content, whether that's like like using RBass or something. And lately I've been using Knock, which is like this producer's plugin in there that it has like a sub feature where I'll put a kick drum through it and it'll create really clean sub content. And the reason why I'll do that is because, again, you will have phase cancellation. There's just no getting around it. It's kind of crazy. So like, and the other thing is the LFE doesn't get folded down into the stereo. So if the whole goal for Atmos right now, at least, is that someday you're going to want to use the stereo, LFE just disappears. So you have to have to know what you're putting in there, because it's going to go away and the down mixes are going to get quieter and quieter. So you have to be kind of cautious and aware of that.
Do you think that I almost sounds like an experience people might have when they're listening to Atmos versus the stereo mix, which hopefully we don't have to do that for much longer. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I think one of the first things people did was that everything, all old records are getting mixed. So everybody goes listen to the original stereo one, and then they listen to the Atmos one. And if they're listening, in a car or somewhere like that and not realizing it, they might be getting that stereo feed of the Atmos version,
correct,
minus the low end.
Yeah. That's
very
definitely
interesting,
possible.
because I feel like I've heard some situations where I was like, wait, the low end is gone. And it might have been just that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, room tuning and phase alignment with Atmos stuff is just the absolute most important thing, because you will make the absolute wrong decisions if things aren't perfect. And literally perfect. They need to be perfect. Okay.
So it's worth selling that house.
It is worth selling. Well, I will say this. I just got we all use Trenovs in Infrasonic, and I just got a 32 channel Trenov, and I've had my room tuned by Dolby, and it was great. And their way of tuning stuff is great, and it works for the most part. But the Trenov has been like an absolute game changer. Just even listening back to stuff that I've done. I'm going to be starting some new mixes hopefully this week, I think. But like having things be so perfectly aligned and tuned it's eye-opening, because now in the room, the three-dimensionality that you're trying to achieve when you're looking at the renderer, like where you place things, you can really feel it in the room now. Like I have a hip-hop mix that I did a long time ago, and I was listening to it, and I put the snare directly in front of my forehead in the middle of the room. And before, it just sounded like it was, coming from the front of the room, center speaker maybe, or whatever. Now it sounds like you can reach out and grab it right in front of your face. Wow. And, and that's just, things being properly aligned. And it's really kind of made a huge difference.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I listened to Andrew Sheps play some mixes at the PMC booth at NAMM, and there was some sounds where like it sounded like the whole sound just was in the center of the room.
Yeah.
Like, covering us all sitting in chairs. And I was like, wow, this is pretty wild.
Yeah.
All right. So let me see here. Let me jump back over to you, Nick. Split Despise You, one of the records, speed punk record in your discography.
Yeah.
What with music like that, where are some of the places that we're most likely to screw up in production, recording, mixing? Like, I wrote was, too much highs and too much lows. It's a lot of information coming at you musically all at once. And I think this, that applies to a lot of the records that you're making that are aggressive. So what are some things you've learned about, like, what is supposed to be coming at you during this whole song?
Yeah.
And what shouldn't?
Well, with heavy music, I feel like it's so guitar heavy and guitar driven that sometimes it gets overdone. So the guitars come way, way, way forward, and they kind of wash everything out because they want to have this big chunky riff, and and it kind of takes up a lot of the room where, you know, some of the drums and vocal power are sitting. So I feel like a lot of times with engineers working on like heavier music records, you know, they'll focus on the guitar sound and it'll sound awesome, but then to get the master to start, you know, moving and have movement and have some sort of impact, I find myself having to lean harder into EQ and compression to sort of pull some of those transients up and level that out. So I think, you know, the biggest thing is the biggest issues there, just the guitars are maybe a little too loud. And then the other issue I run into a lot with I mean, kind of in general, not even genre dependent, is high frequencies tend to be a lot sharper and pokier nowadays. So that's another thing that I feel like, you know, maybe depending on the listening systems where people are listening on, or maybe just ignoring ear fatigue, a lot of mixes end up having very sharp top end that needs to get controlled before I can actually bring the air out of a mix in the mastering stage. So I feel like that's a big one that's been an issue.
Do you think that could partly be a result of analog versus everybody's recording digital now, and everybody's got a, you know, an inexpensive hyped
microphone condenser
mic as an overhead?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these microphones, you know, some of them, because I have plenty of friends who manufacture microphones, you know, and they'll test capsules, and I've seen charts where, you know, there's like 12.5K spike, that's like 6 to 10 dB spike on the frequency response of a microphone capsule, and it's just the way it's manufactured, and and some people would perceive that as being a very detailed, airy sound. But what they don't realize is when you take that onto any other thing, like throw it as overheads on a drum set or something, then the cymbals now all of a sudden have this 10 dB spike at 12.5K, and you don't even realize you're starting that way, because the monitors you're listening on maybe you're either unfamiliar because you're working in a studio that you're unfamiliar with the sound of, or you're working on some speakers that just don't have the resolution up there for you to be able to have that tickle your eardrum and know that it may be an issue. So I think that's it. I think that's really, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. I mean, that's where my brain goes to, is just, wow, like everything's so hyped in the top end nowadays. And that's probably one of the most challenging things just in mastering in general, is just getting some of these resonant peaks that just end up in a lot of mixes to get tamed, and then be able to pull the blanket off of the mix afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like, Jay, when we were talking about, you know, how all the presets all sound gigantic, you know, the mics that people have in studios, sometimes they get the one that just sounds like gigantic, but it's, you start to learn, you know what, a dynamic mic that doesn't have any top or any bottom could be the perfect choice in this situation.
It probably will be. We were, the other day, Nick is always helping me because I get vocals a lot that have that spike in it, and it's kind of insane when you see it. It's like and it's hard to deal with because it's been mixed around or treat, you know, like they took that into consideration, thinking it was, like he said, really airy, but it's a really tight band and this giant spike of stuff that then you try to knock it out, and you end up kind of destroying the way the vocal sounds. It's a troubling thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and you probably use the same mic for the percussion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, then you got all the cymbals and everything hugging in around it, and you're trying to pull this thing out, and then next thing you know, the cymbals, the drum set sounds dull as hell. So
yeah, you feel like you have this hole up there. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, for both of you guys, real guitar amps versus digital guitar amps and impulse response cabinets and stuff like that. What are your thoughts? How should we be avoiding one of those two, and or conversely, are we missing out on an amazing opportunity to make great sounding records?
I think Kempers fucking rule.
All right.
Just saying, hot take.
Hashtag Kemper on this podcast.
I think they rule. I know, Jay, you have a Kemper, right?
I do.
Yeah. So like real guitar amps also rip, and there's nothing that's gonna really like replace the feeling you get when you flick on a Marshall half stack and you just let it fucking fly. But the Kemper for recording, I mean, you don't need all that level. It does a really good job modeling stuff. I think a lot of other companies out there are doing a good job modeling, doing the impulse response and modeling these different tones of different amps, and it's gotten really, really good.
Have you found that at the mixing and mastering stage, when real amps are used, you're more likely to run into some EQ issues in the guitars that need to get sorted out?
I think
versus, them fitting appropriately or something like that.
I feel like half the time I don't even know what's real and what's not. Like,
I mean, you guys are real though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I never know on the mastering side. It's very few times that if I have a relationship with certain people that are sending me mixes and I know for a fact they just use a Kemper, then I'll know. But otherwise, I can't really tell. And those mixes are coming from guitar players most of the time, so they sound good. I haven't run into any issues on the mastering side when people use modeled amps versus real amps.
What if you have real amps, but the relationship with the client is sort of fake?
Oh yeah, then
all right.
All
right, Jay, I got a real question for you now. We're bringing it back to Lovecraft with Christopher Young, Scream Warriors. Tell us a little bit more about that record. It sounds amazing. I feel like we briefly talked about it at the beginning and then didn't come back again. But what are some things about, like some special moments on that record for you? I mean, there's some incredible sounds in there. It's like, it really is a sort of if you want to be sort of frightened rock stars, you can listen to this record and you feel like you're in a creepy video game. It's awesome.
Yeah. I think, some of the fun stuff that we did was we wanted to play with, there's a lot of skits on the record, so making them very literal and realistic. There's a skit, I believe, where a woman gets murdered. But the car drives up from behind you, and then there's a conversation that happens in front of you, and then she's grabbed and pulled away to the right of you. And so doing stuff like that, using kind of the fact that it's, technically a cinema format first, and using it like that, but then also doing that within the music. And there's, I think I spoke about it slightly earlier, but there's that one song where everything kind of drops down to mono and moves around the room. And that was done because at the center point behind you, the vocal says, "Can you feel me breathing on your neck?" or something. So being able to just play with lyrics and just, doing things very purposefully with the mixes was just great,
I mean, it's just fun. I mean, like there's these songs that start where you hear the dripping water over to the right, and then it's over to the left, and then it's over to the right, and like the thumping, it just sounds like there's thumping creature footsteps.
Yeah,
and you don't know what it is.
Well, there's also some of the percussion or saws and stuff, and all that stuff is meant. They were meant to be jump scare moments. I know I brought Nick in a couple times, and I would stand behind him and watch to see if I'd get him to turn his head, and right. So there are a couple moments that happen like that throughout the record, and the hearing in the room is, I mean, the headphones are great, but hearing it in a room, and we did a showing at the Dolby Theater out here when it came out, and they played it the entire record but with the lights off, which is really cool.
Anything on the screen or just black on the screens?
Blank.
Couldn't see shit.
I couldn't see anything. So you're really just, in it and feeling it. Yeah, I mean, it again, it was like the most freeing and challenging thing. I wouldn't even say challenging. It was just freeing because it was just like, now it's time for me to play, and, I'm given the time to just experiment with stuff. And
well, it's such a cool concept, and I felt like I was experiencing that when I was listening to those mixes at NAMM, where it's like I was reminded that closing your eyes or maybe you do or don't close your eyes, but not looking at something.
Yeah.
I was sitting there listening to the mixes, and then I imagined for a sec, I was like, oh, what if there was a big video showing? And I realized it would have sort of made this experience less interesting to me. It's very immersive when you're just experiencing the audio. I mean, if you even imagine it, it's like imagine you go into a haunted house and they're like, all right, now close your eyes. And then you hear sounds around you and you're heightened attention, and all that. So there's really something cool about it.
There is an interesting belief about Atmos stuff, which I actually kind of agree with, is you should try, if you can, to hide the speakers behind cloth or whatever in the walls, because when when you're sitting in a room and you're looking at something, you're thinking, I got to put it right there, but it's not, like off right to my left where that speaker is, but maybe you really want it in between, or a little bit to the front, a little bit to the back. And it's hard to kind of do that if you have those visual cues right in front of you that you're used to thinking that's where the sound is coming from.
Yeah. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. All right, so let's see here. Nick, we'll jump back over to you. Actually, this is to both of you guys. Sure. Do you guys have any tips for staying healthy as people, sitting in a chair in a studio, doing what you do? Because we're all doing more of that, and we want to be in the studio, but we want to do well from it. What thoughts do you guys have?
Get a dog.
Get a dog.
Get a 7-month-old chocolate lab. He'll keep you busy. I got one, and he, like I was saying earlier, like we just well, off air probably, but he forces me to take breaks, take walks, and I'm forced to a schedule, so I'm not beholden and chained to the desk for 24 hours a day. So,
nice.
That's my tip.
That's a good tip. For me, I have a routine. Like usually I take an hour every morning before I come to work, and I work out at home or in some capacity, because I know I'm going to spend the next, 10 or so hours sitting in a chair. I also have bands in my room, so when I'm printing stuff or I have to stand around, I can do little stretches or whatever you do with bands.
Yeah, not like
like musical bands. Yeah, you wrap them around. I wrap them around the truss in my system, and I just pull on them.
You're like, hey drummer, you look big and strong.
There you go.
Here, come over here and crack my back.
But yeah, that, and like Nick said, like the dog thing is good. Like a lot of times we'll take walks to go to the
I'll come
store and get coffee or something. But just just try to get up and move around. Like you're going to be stuck, so having a reason to get up and move around you got to find some reason.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's just get up out of the chair.
Yeah, just
anything will do. Unfortunately, sometimes my go-to is like I just go right back to the espresso machine, and I'm like, I don't need another espresso. Right?
That is the problem.
Yep,
that is the problem.
I need to get a machine that just spits out like sparkling water.
You say that. I've had that.
Oh, really?
It doesn't do the same thing. Doesn't do the same thing as espresso though. So then you just
maybe I just need a giant helium tank,
dude. Yeah, it'd keep you entertained for hours, maybe minutes.
Okay, this one, this question kind of is for you, Jay, I guess.
Sure.
La Divinidad, if I'm saying that, Femenina, T3R Elemento. Really cool sounding record. I'm not sure if that's Tejano music or what the style is, but just really, I love it's like acoustic, but it's so in your face. And I hear that as an approach to making records from, Central America, Mexico and that area. Just, acoustic elements are just like bam, like an EDM record. Talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts are about that stuff.
So it's interesting. I don't know how I believe that one's on Dell Records. That stuff is so raw. It's almost got this like punk rock vibe to it, because when you look into those people, they're just doing this stuff in like, their garages, and they're really doing it on like a really small level, and a lot of it, the stuff sounds amazing, and the playing is so strange and beautiful at times, and
variety of instruments,
yes,
big ones and small ones, so they all have these different. They sort of fit in the mix.
Yeah, and that stuff is fun to work in with Atmos, because it's just that's like I have a varying degree of things that I do depending on genre, and it's like, so with stuff like that, I try to just treat it like, how do I make a larger expansive space? I'm not trying to make it sound larger than life or unreal. I just want it to feel like you're not necessarily at a show watching someone, but like you're in a space with them. It's intimate, and so it's fun to just be able to spread that stuff out. And kind of give all that detail space to move around, be heard.
Nick, do you get a chance to work on sort of in-your-face acoustic stuff as well?
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff. I do a lot of stuff. So like the vinyl realm is so eclectic, and I'm doing different types of records all the time. Mm-hmm. Trying to think of like the last big acoustic record that I did. It's been a minute. Do
you feel like just generally speaking, do you feel like there are similarities or differences to doing sort of heavy rock, guitar rock band stuff?
Yeah, well, there's a lot more differences, at least as far as I'm concerned, for, the way that I'm mastering a like heavy record or versus an acoustic album. Obviously I'm not going to try to make it as loud as I would try to make a like a heavier record, because it's already going to come out sounding louder because it's in the acoustics. It just has more space. It just comes out sounding a lot louder. So I'll do things a little differently for an acoustic album versus a heavier album.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, so guys, we are basically at the end of our interview here, and I really appreciate you guys doing this with us. This was a lot of fun, actually, just go back and forth. Yeah. So let me go right to our closing question. This is hypothetical, and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. And this would be really funny if we flip flopped, but I don't know if that'll work. But you get to go back in time and find your younger self and say, "Listen, I've come back to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing to being a rock star of the recording studio one day." What advice would you go back and give yourself? Unless you guys think you can go back and give each other advice.
Oh,
Nick, give me advice.
You are the one giving me advice all the time, so I don't know what advice I have to give you.
Crap.
That's what you get for being older. I think if I had to give Jay Clark advice, what would I give you?
Young Jay on the drum set, playing.
There you go.
Funky beats or rocking out?
Rocking out.
Totally rocking out.
Like boom, 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 that kind of thing.
I'm not sure what that was.
All right,
I think that was my minor threat. But
yeah,
okay. No, Nick, go ahead. No.
I don't really have advice. I mean, you're kind of practically perfect, so I don't really have any great advice for you. I'd say maybe just have more fun.
Oh, he thinks I don't have fun, guys.
I love this twist. This
Have
is
a little more fun.
I'm about to explode. I'm going to blow up the whole podcast universe with this.
No, that's funny. I'd give both of us the same advice, which would be to
Don't
not
be so
like
hard on ourselves.
no, just like the time it takes to get somewhere, whether it's in a career or just in a skill. Don't be deterred by it. You know, like follow passion, and then time will produce the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's like watching the hour hand on a clock.
Yes.
Sometimes you're not going to see it move if you watch it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just got to come back later.
That's good advice. Yep.
Well, fellas, thank you so much for joining us in Recording Studio Rockstars. It's really cool to meet you both and get to hang out today. And I love the wide variety of topics we covered. It's like vinyl versus Atmos versus artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Vinyl and Atmos won.
That's just every day here, man. We're just chat GPTing and vinyl and Atmos all day long.
Yeah. Let the rock stars know, where should they go to find out more about you guys? I mean, we have playlists in the show notes, so please listen to the music there. But I think it's over on the Infrasonic website as well.
Yeah. For me, I mean, just obviously, if you're inquiring, you want me to master a record, Nick at infrasonic.sound.com, or just hit up Infrasonic Sound directly. If you want to DM me, ask me some questions, or just connect on Instagram or something, it's just at Townsend Mastering. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically
awesome.
Same for me. You can book me at Infrasonic, or my personal website for post stuff and all the other stuff, which is jcrowclark.com. And Instagram is, this is a terrible one, I should change it, _J_Crow Clark.
Love it. Hey, well, I guess I don't need to share my personal one, but my personal email is horrible because I didn't know any of the things that you know now when you start a new one.
You know,
but
I was just going to say, I have a personal email, and I thought it was so funny when I came up with it, and it's Jaw the Clark, because I was a really big Dub fan, and it's haunted me ever since in a professional way. I had to stop using it. It's
what's
so
the
confusing.
reference?
Like
for that,
Jah, it's like a religious figure, right?
Rastafari.
Nick? Yeah, Rastafari.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Sorry. I didn't know if this was like the big, like, Skrillex's mentor, and I was supposed to know.
Oh, no.
No. J-A-H. Jah Rastafari.
Yes.
Well, sometimes, I go by Lidge, I went by Eli before. Now I'm Lidge. I figure after this, it's Jah next.
There you go.
It's all just different parts of Elijah.
Do it. Get dreads and wear a beanie.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for doing this. I can't wait to come out and see you guys at Infrasonic West.
Yeah.
I look forward. I want to come visit the
have
studio
you by.
sometime and see what you're doing.
Come hang out.
Absolutely.
Rockstars, thank you for listening. Nick and Jay, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and OWC. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Wessel Vasilchenko, Braden Stremming, Liz Hulitskaya, and Roberto Oxman de Aragao for additional podcasts and video help. Thanks so much for listening, rock stars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.